You have failures. You are not a failure. Bess McCarty here, Victoria, Kansas, with the MLM Lunchtime Leadership Show, reporting to you on a book today. Our book today that we're covering is the book Failing Forward by John Maxwell. Very, very powerful book to overcome, to throw out that failure mentality. So this show is sponsored by the MLM Millionaire Academy, our generic school for network marketers. You can find a link to that below. But most important thing, failing forward, using failure as a stepping stone and as a tool, as an advantage to moving forward. So what I just said, you know, I can make a mistake, but I am not a mistake. Let me separate my behavior and my experiences in life from my own identity and who I am. I am not a mistake. I can make mistakes. I can learn from them. I can turn things around. I am a powerful, creative being. I am not a mistake. I am not a failure. Okay, so that's the first thing John Maxwell wants us to know. Today I'm covering chapter 4, where he talks about how to turn failure around. And he tells a really cool story about the Wright brothers. Do you guys know that? Where these two bicycle mechanics, the Wright brothers, were the first people, they're credited with first people to fly a manned aircraft. And some people know that, but not a lot of people know that at that same time, there was somebody else developing a manned aircraft too, and shooting it, that could have been the first person to get a man off the ground in an airplane, and that was Samuel Langley. So Samuel Langley was very different than the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers were kind of unknown, obscure, uneducated, unfunded, you know? And Sam Langley was just the opposite. He was very well known at a university, and he had written a bunch of important papers on aerodynamics, and had gotten a big reputation, and did a few experiments that went real well with unmanned aircraft. And then he approached the U.S. Department of War and said, would you fund this experiment, this project? And so they did. They gave him $50,000 back then in 1890 something. It was a huge amount of money. So then he hired this engineer named Manley. And a few years later, they're ready to launch this aircraft. And so they have it on the launching pad, and I think Manley climbs in there, and something catches as it launches and ends up throwing the plane into 16 feet of water about 15 yards away. So huge disappointment, huge embarrassment. New York Times said, oh, this is, you know, a huge fiasco, real embarrassing fiasco. So he was humiliated, but he didn't let that stop him. They went back to work, and a few weeks they're ready to launch again. This time he gets caught again, and this time the plane gets thrown into a river, and Manley almost dies. And now the New York Times is even more severe with him. They said, we hope that Professor Langley gives up this adventure, this, you know, this wasting the taxpayers' money, and we hope that he doesn't further hurt his reputation by continuing on these experiments. They didn't believe in him, and they didn't believe that flying could really happen. So guess what? He gave up. He did. And a few days later, the Wright brothers flew their first aircraft over the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk. And so that made history. When I look at this, I see Professor Langley put public opinion and his reputation, the public opinion of him and of the fantasy of flying, because they really didn't really believe it could happen. He put that before his dream. He gave up that. And you know what happened? A couple years later, he had a stroke, and a year after that, he passed away. Whereas the Wright brothers, they didn't have any of that to risk. They were unknowns. They didn't have any reputation to risk, right? And they were not scared about wasting any taxpayers' dollars because it was funded by themselves. So they didn't have this to lose. And Langley didn't have to let that defeat him, but he did, you know. But the Wright brothers kept on, furthered their experiments, and eventually got public recognition. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that if we have a a success doesn't mean we rest on our laurels and stop there, because Wright Brothers kept on evolving it. They didn't say, well, we've made it now. They kept on evolving it. But Langley, neither when we have a failure do we need to let that defeat us and say, well, this is the end all, right? And we neither want a success to be the end all nor a failure to be the end all, because really neither are not. So we want to keep going in spite of that. We want to not look at the scoreboard. We want to do it for the love of doing it, for the passion of doing it, for our purpose, and not let a success or a failure defeat us. Either one make us stop, either one. John Maxwell further talks about, in this book, about the cycle of fear. Fear can create inaction, and that creates inexperience, and that creates inability, which creates more fear. Or it can actually create the wrong action, which can generate more fear. So he says what we need to do is we need to interrupt this cycle of inaction by taking action. Don't wait for the fear to go away. Don't wait for motivation to come in. Because when you take action, you start to get a little bit of success, and then the motivation starts coming in to sustain that success, not to create it. A lot of times the toughest part about success is just getting going initially, starting the initial action, and then also keeping going when there's discouragement. I coach network marketers and people in business and life for health, relationships, and their business, but a lot of network marketers I coach. And a lot of times they get discouraged about how many people it takes to go through to find that 1 or 5% who are entrepreneurial and who are really ready to do something and be proactive in their lives. So I tell them, like John Wooden, the famous UCLA basketball coach, do not watch the scoreboard. Do not count how many recruits. Do count how many presentations you do a day, because that's like planting the seeds. Do count that. Keep track of that. Make that your goal, to be better every day, just like John Wooden told his basketball players. If you make yourself better every day, that's what your goal is. Not to watch the scoreboard, not to see what the score is now, because the score could make them overconfident if it was good, and it could make them totally discouraged if it was bad. Neither are good for basketball. But doing your best every day and doing better today than you did yesterday is good for basketball games. And that's why they won so much, because they didn't look at the scoreboard. They focused on being better every day, doing their best. So in network marketing, if network marketers do this, and I was full-time one for years, now I'm a dedicated generic coach for network marketers because I can help more people this way. But if network marketers focus on getting better at inviting people, contacting them, developing relationships or rapport with people, doing their 10-minute presentations, and closing, showing people, asking, do you see an opportunity here? Can you afford to take advantage of it? And is now good, or does it make more sense to wait till payday? Those are the closing questions that we teach in the MLM Millionaire Academy, our generic school for network marketers. I'll post a link for that below too. So when we focus on doing these things well, doing these steps well, then the results naturally come. Sooner or later, they come. Sometimes it takes a while. But don't focus on the scoreboard. Don't focus on the results. And don't wait for motivation to come. Don't wait for fear to go away to be able to take action. It's Viktor Frankl said that what we fear often brings that thing about. So we got to break that cycle of fear, because whatever we focus on, we manifest, right? Life obediently gives us whatever we think about and whatever we focus on. So let's be very careful of that. What is essential? So here's a question that we can ask ourselves. John Maxwell says, ask yourself, what is essential? What is essential to your success that you are the most afraid to tackle right now? What is the most essential to your success that you are afraid to tackle right now? Write it down. And then write down one small step that you are willing to do to start to turn that around. And it will. I'll bring more later. Thank you for watching. Take care. Love you. Bye-bye.